Lord, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for an opportunity to gather together. We thank you, Lord, for taking and just being with us in a mighty way here. I pray, Lord, that your hand would be mighty, that we would take and just grasp what you want us to grasp, lay hold of what you want us to lay hold of. And Father, we can just hear your voice today. So Jesus, we love you, we praise you, we thank you, Lord, for all that you're doing. Amen. Well, guys, we're going to get started here this morning on something that's a little bit different. Did everybody know what today is?
Pentecost.
Pentecost Sunday. So that's really interesting. I don't know if you've ever heard about this before. There's some fragments of some scrolls that they found in Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. In Qumran there was like, I think it's 7 caves or something like that. And in that were some jars, some old scrolls there that were in pottery jars. And actually, in those caves was the first complete scroll of the book of Isaiah. And that's the one that's on display in Jerusalem now in the museum there. But amongst these scrolls, were some fragments that were found that's called tongues of fire. Tongues of fire. And tongues of fire, this was written down by some sages and stuff back in, probably 1,000 years BC. And so these guys were describing what happened at Mount Sinai when Moses went there and the law was given. Now this is really interesting because, Pentecost is a remembrance of Sinai is what it is. So, in fact, the Jews just celebrated the Feast of Weeks here on Friday. And so now we celebrate Pentecost today, but the Feast of Weeks that they call it, or Shabbat is what it's called, is 50 days after Passover. And so that's when we celebrate Pentecost, at 50 days after Passover here. Now their calendar's a little weird and the days don't line up for some reason. I won't go into that. But it's really interesting. They found these up here on your screen. You'll see there, especially these top 2 ones right here. These are fragments of what they call tongues of fire that describe what happened at Mount Sinai. In fact, there were some guys that said that it says rabbinical tradition. This is from the International Christian Assembly in Jerusalem. And they just wrote this the other day. This is interesting. Rabbinical tradition holds that every word God spoke that day was like the stroke of a hammer on an anvil. With each stroke on the anvil, which was Mount Sinai, sparks or tongues of fire flew outward. A first century sage, Rabbi Yakina, maintained that it split up into 70 languages, matching the languages spoken among the 70 nations. In other words, Israel realized from the beginning that the Torah would be significant not only for Jews, but for all mankind. So that is interesting. So here this sage says that these things that happened there, when God put those words in the tablets there, it come across in 70 languages. And so it's like every time that something was burned into that stone, the whole mountain was on fire, it says. It says it was on fire. Sinai was on fire when God was writing these in the tablets. And this is interesting what this says there. He wrote it out, this sage says, in 70 languages. So what happens on the day of Pentecost? They were all gathered in the upper room, Acts chapter 2. Excuse me. And it said, when the day of Pentecost had fully come, there appeared unto them cloven tongues of fire, and each man heard him speak the word of God in his own language. And so there was how many was in the upper room? 120. 120 were there. Languages were heard and spoken there. And the same thing happened at Mount Sinai. So this is really interesting. That is really something. I find this incredible. I didn't know about this here until I got researching this a little bit more, but those fragments that they found in Qumran in the caves there, were of a description of what was happening at Sinai. So we'll go, that's another story for another day, but I thought since it's Pentecost Sunday, we'd share that. So here we go. Last Sunday, we spoke here in this class on, we're again focusing on, obeying the Word of God. And last week we spoke from the Old Testament. Does anybody need a handout from last week? Raise your hand if you need one. Here, why don't you go hand out? Okay, so last week, take the bottom, it's the top two that are not right. Next, yeah, got it. Okay, you got it. So last week we talked about that. We focused on the Old Testament because in looking at that, we saw that the patriarchs, obeyed God and were obedient to Him. So Abraham, when he was called, he went out, he left the land, sojourned, and it explains all about that on that sheet. Some others there. Then we talked a little bit from 1 Samuel 15, where it says obedience is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. So it explains all of that on that sheet there. Now today we're going to come to the New Testament, and we're going to look at this in a little different light here, because what I want us to see here is this. And I know maybe I'm a little bit different path than some of you thought I might go, but this is how we're going to go. This is what I feel like the Lord would say. In the Old Testament, the guys are going here and going this way. In the New Testament, now it's the same thing. I mean, we got to remember that when God spoke stuff, when He spoke stuff, He took and He wanted us to remember what He said doesn't change. And what He says is this right here. If you look here in the Old Testament there, in Deuteronomy 4:2, He says, you must add nothing to what I command you or take away nothing from it, so that you may keep the commands of the Lord your God I am giving you. And then He repeats that again in the 12th chapter of Deuteronomy. And it says, 32nd verse, be careful to do nothing I command you. Be careful to do everything I command you. Do not add anything or take away from it. Now, I don't know if you've ever, doesn't that sound familiar? Don't add or take away from it. I mean, that's what's in the book of Revelation. But that came from right here. This came from right here. Because God made it clear in the beginning. He says, I want you to pay attention to what I say. Don't subtract from it or do anything. And the purpose of this is that you can do what I command you to do. No. Now that sounds a little heavy there. Well, maybe just a little bit, maybe. But what we want to see from this is Jesus says, He talks about this too. If you look on your handout there, I start with Revelation 3. It's up here on your screen too. Revelation 3, verse 20 says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in to him and dine with him, and he with me. So again, it's about hearing His voice, and the response here is if you open the door. So it's one thing to hear, it's another thing to open the door and pay attention. So when the voice of the Lord is there, my voice, He says, if He hears my voice, the key is, are we listening to His voice, and how are we responding to it? And here He says, if you open the door, I will come in and dine with him, and he with me. Now let's look at similar language here in the book of John, the 10th chapter. Then Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. And then again He says in John 10, verse 9, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and will go in and out and find pasture. Now look at that. It's what He said in Revelation here. He says, I'm going to come in and dine with him, and he with me. And here He says, I'm going to go in and out. You're going to be able to go in and out and find pasture. You're going to find nourishment for you. You're going to find what keeps you going. And you're doing that because you're going through the door, which is Jesus. So everybody got that? Who's the door? Jesus. Now, if anybody's ever got something they want to talk about or say something more, raise your hand and I'll try to watch for it. Now, let's look here. What I'm going to try to do going forward is I'm going to try to build on some concepts here. So I want us to pay attention about the words love me, that we're going to see here in a minute, and right after that, then we're going to go into the concept of follow me. So there's two things here He's talking about, and both of them relate to hearing His voice. So let's look what He says here. John 14:15. If you love me, keep my commandments. Okay, so that's, if you love me, do what I say. If you love me, obey. If you love me, take and just do what I tell you to do. So that's interesting. Let's go to the next one there, John 14:23. Jesus answered and said to him, and go back and read the context, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him. And so he says here in this, again, he goes back to this thing of loving me, and before he said in verse 15, keeping my commandments, he says, well, he keeps my word, and the Father will love him, we will come to him and make our home with him. That's basically what he kind of said back in Revelation also. So it's this thing, he wants us to obey. He wants us to obey. He wants us to pay attention and obey. And so let's go to the next one there. John 14:24. He who does not love me does not keep my words, and the words which you hear is not mine, but the Father's who sent me. So now he takes and turns it a little bit different. He says, if you love me, you'll keep my commands. But now he flips it around. He says this, he who does not love me does not keep my commands. Now, I'm not trying to lay a guilt trip on anybody. I'm not trying to do that. We need to learn to be secure in the love of God. But Jesus said some hard things here. He said some hard things. And he wants us to pay attention. He wants us to be doers of what he says to do. He wants us to obey and do it. And so as he talks here then, he relates it to love then. And so that's why I think it's so important to really have a grasp on the love of God that he has for you. The love that Jesus has for us is beyond anything we can describe. And he wants us to abide in it. Because look what the next verse says. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. Now what's that mean? What's he talking about there? Just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love, he says. So he's talking about several different things here. He's talking about loving me, those that don't love me, and abiding in my love. So this thing of abiding in his love, I think to me is kind of a growing process. When you're first saved, hopefully you've got a grasp on how much God loves you. Because God so loved the world so much, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. And once we get a grasp on that kind of love for us, it starts in there. But it's kind of like almost in a marriage, I'm hoping that as we get older, we love each other more. But I love my wife more. She's awesome. I love her. And I feel like we have come, we've had some rocky times. Well, not real bad, we've had some things. But I don't think we've ever had a time where it says in the Bible, and they had no small disputation. We haven't had that. We've disagreed on some things, but we haven't had a knockdown, drag out. Never. So I love that. But there's something about growing in love and taking it and letting the love of God increase it. And then, as you obey the Lord, then we grow deeper into that love. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? And so he's talking about the thing about love and how that works and how that relates to either obeying him or not obeying him. Now, notice what it says here now. So we built on this. We've got loving him. We see the one who does not love him. We see that if you keep his commandments, you will abide in my love. And then look at this. I just love these words in here. John 8:31. Then Jesus said to those Jews who believed on him, if you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed. Okay, so we've talked about abiding in love and doing that. And he is telling us here now, he says that if you abide in my word, you're my disciple. So, to me, as I look at that word disciple, it's like this. It basically, in a nutshell, it means this: a disciplined one. Somebody that's disciplined. A disciple. And Jesus said to go make disciples. Is that what he said? He didn't say to make converts. He said to make disciples. Now, you got to be converted to be a disciple first. But his emphasis is on a disciple, someone that has discipline in their life to take and to follow and do what he's talking about. So notice what he does here. But again, it's that abide. So he's talked about abiding in his love. Now he says, abide in my word. And if you do that, that will get you into a process of being a disciple. Okay? So, we talked just at the very first about hearing his voice and hearing the word. And now we talked in several aspects of how that goes to abiding and staying in it and continuing in it. Now, let's go just a little bit further. In John 10:16, he says this, and other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. So what's he talking about there? But it says they hear his voice. So basically what I think is this, is he's even telling his disciples back then. He says, I came to the Jews to work with you. I came to you Jewish people. But he said, I've got others here that I want to make in right relationship with me, just like I want to do with you. And there's going to be one flock. There's going to be one flock. And Paul talks about this a lot in his epistles when he talks about, he's broken down the middle wall partition, made the two one, because there was a lot of animosity between the Gentile Christians and the Jewish Christians back then. And God says, I want to make them one flock. I want to make them one flock, and they'll both hear my voice and walk with me together. So that's what he's talking about there. So, but he says both of them are going to hear his voice. And look what he says in John 10:27. My sheep hear my voice, I know them, and they will follow me. So, before here, it says, you abide in my word, you're my disciples indeed. We saw that in John 8:31. My sheep hear my voice, I know them, and they follow me. And so a disciple is someone that follows Jesus. And so he says, I want you to learn to grasp this and lay hold of it. Now the important thing to remember to me is this. When we're saved and we're born again, you must have confidence in you that you can say, Jesus is speaking to me and I want to hear him. The thing that I think messes some people up is they just don't really sense that the Lord is taking and wanting to speak to them and is showing them things. And so we need to just say, yes, Lord, I am a believer in you. Your word says, my sheep hear my voice, and they will follow me. And so, Lord, when I get up each day, Lord, I want to hear your voice. And to hear his voice, the Lord just speaks to me, and the scriptures come rattling around in my head. I mean, I'll wake up in the middle of the night thinking of a scripture. Scripture's rattling around my head. I'll go get up and go read about it and study it, and say, Lord, what is it you're trying to say to me out of this? And so, that's just part of hearing his voice. And again, the thing is, he wants us to follow him and be a disciple. Okay, everybody got that? Now, this is where it gets interesting now. So we've talked about a couple of things here. We've talked about what Jesus said. We talked about abiding. We talked about being a disciple. We talked about being a follower. Now, is there something else that might hinder us? Are there things out there that might hinder us from being on that path? And that's what I want to talk about next. So we're going to spend some considerable time on this right here. So if you look at this next section, now again, remember what we've heard. Let's see what he says now in this. In Matthew 10:38, and Jesus says, he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. And then in Matthew 16:24, and then we'll stop. And Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. And so remember where we saw those words, follow me, up there? Okay, now what is this about? He says, we have to take and do this. He says, you have to take up your cross. Okay, can somebody explain to me what that means, to take up your cross? What does that mean? What's it mean to you? If you hear that, what does it mean to you? What does it mean to take up your cross? Is this important?
Be obedient.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so
It's
crucifying the flesh every day.
Okay, I think that's part, because the cross was the instrument of death. So he says, take up this instrument of death and see how that applies to how you live. And I think that's very good. Yeah. So we, it's like Paul said, I die daily. Now what does he mean by that? I die daily. And I think it's in conjunction with the cross. Go ahead, Wanda.
But I feel like it goes even further.
Okay.
It goes from, in a sense, a negative of denying self to a positive of using what God has given you.
Okay.
And so if God gave me the ability to write, then I should be doing that by taking up my cross.
Yeah.
Writing takes time, thought, effort, knowledge. That's just what God has given me. Everybody here has something that they can give to the Lord as in a sense, a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe it's still like denying self. It's still a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Between you and Keith, you two are writers. I just love reading Keith's stuff. I mean, that guy, I look what time he put those on. It's like 4:30 in the morning, and he's writing this stuff at 4:30 in the morning. It's just right on, man. The morning's the only time. You got it there. So there you go. Yeah, if you get up at 7 o'clock, the day's half over. For us morning people.
Yes.
So that's right on. So yes, both the things that he's wanting to deal with us, yes, and then there's positive things too. I think each of us, God's deposited something inside of us that he wants us to discover and let it happen in our lives.
Thank you.
So so gifting. But notice isn't that is interesting. If you don't take up your cross and follow him, you're not worthy of him. I mean, that's a hard word, man. That's a hard word. And then he comes right along and he says, if you desire to come after me, deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. Now look what it says here. I like this verse in Mark 8:34, the next one up there. So he said, this is out of New Living Translation. It says, then calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, if any of you wants to be my follower, and we've seen this word before, turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross, and follow me. Okay, now that hits home a little farther. How many times have I, and I'm not up here saying you guys are a bunch of bums, I'm saying I'm the bum. I'm the one that this applies to because I get selfish ways. I want to do my own thing. And and it's interesting how it puts that. Turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross and follow me. And so it's like, oh gosh. What is it that's selfish in my life? What is it that's something where I'm thinking more of me than somebody else? What is it in my life where I take and I push somebody away because I don't want to deal with the situation, or I don't want to deal. I mean, guys, I gotta be truthful. There's some stuff that I just don't like dealing with. And I said last week, I said our mission field, there's a mission field right over here next door to us. But my soul gets really tired when I think about all the discipleship involved to help them along. I mean, if you ever disciple somebody that has had issues, and you're trying to work with them, I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy. I had this guy at one time that he had been on drugs and alcohol and everything, and just been a mess. Got divorced a couple times. Just a mess. And so I met with this guy every week for over a year. Every week we'd get together, we'd sit down, talk about some of the things, pray through them and everything, and just say, Lord, help us here. Help us. I mean, he wanted to turn his life around. He wanted to. He was determined to follow Jesus. And there's still some things that are hanging on. Every now and then he'd fall back into drugs. And he'd do that, and then we'd get up and go on again. And at least a year, I met with him every week, at least. And it's sometimes just hard to get breakthrough. And so selfishly, I look at things like that and say, Lord, oh man, that was hard. But again, if God is calling us to do that kind of thing of helping people along, there's going to be times we're going to have to deny ourselves and do that. And so that was 30-some years ago I worked with this guy. For the most part, he's done pretty good. He's done pretty good. So that's good when you see that. I've worked with some that just go back and you just pray for them. They just don't want to really follow through it. They don't want to go through the discipleship. They don't want to do it. And sometimes you got to count the cost. I mean, that's what Jesus said. You got to count the cost. So, turning from our selfish ways, taking up our cross, and again, following me, he says. And now this is an interesting one here. Go back and look sometime. I just picked out a few of the ones that says follow me. Because again, they were hearing his voice and had to make a determination if they wanted to follow Jesus. Okay, two things here, right? That's what we're looking at right here. Let's go to the next one. Mark 10:21. And Jesus, this is what we call the rich young ruler. And Jesus, looking at him, he loved him. That's really interesting. This is recorded it's recorded in both Luke and Matthew. But this is the only place, Mark is the only place, it says in the other translations, or other Gospels, it says he looked at him and said to him. This in here says this. I love this. He looked at him and loved him. It specifically says he loved him. He loved him. It doesn't say that in the others. This in here, it says that. He loved him. And he said to him, one thing you lack. Go your way, sell whatever you have, give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And come, take up your cross, and follow me. And it's like, okay, what is this about? I mean, Jesus, he loved him. He loved him. He wanted him to follow, but he says, this is what's in your way. And he says, now, I'm not saying everybody's got to do this. This was for this guy. But it should challenge us, that when we have resources and things that we have, let's pay attention to what God's saying. Now, he definitely spoke to this guy. I think, like I say, I'm not telling you guys go sell everything you have and give it to the poor. I'm not saying that. So don't get me right on this. But I would challenge us to say, if God tells you to do something that doesn't sound quite right, that you should consider it. Go.
Do you think that maybe Jesus, knowing what he knew about Judas, that he was trying to line this guy up and was testing to maybe be the future treasure for the disciples?
Might be. Because Judas was the one that held the money bags, and Judas was the one that would eventually betray him, and he's not the money bag guy anymore.
He was also skimming.
Yeah, he was also skimming. Yes.
Yes.
He was taking him. Yeah. So this was a challenge to this guy, and again, it comes up, and it says, he says that he makes him a pretty good deal, actually. It says, go your way, sell whatever you have, give to the poor, and your treasure will be in heaven. That's a pretty good deal. It's good to have treasure in heaven. That's a good place to store up treasure. And there's a whole thing we could go into on that. But I find it interesting. He says this. He tells you to do that. Then go take up your cross and follow me. And again, it's that take up your cross, follow me. And the whole follow me thing, like we see down through the top of the sheet on. Follow me. Hear my word, follow me. Do what I say, follow me. And so that's the challenge. So what was the challenge here? He had a roadblock here. This guy had a roadblock that kept him from following Jesus. And Jesus challenged him on it. So if Jesus challenges us, I just say pay attention. Pay attention. And remember this story. Now, let's look at something else that I think is interesting too. Let's go to the book of Hebrews here at the top here. So we've heard here, we've got some stuff that take up your cross. We saw that, and which is very important. I think we just lay a hold on that. But here's another thought coming across right here. Hebrews 3:15, New Living Translation. Remember what it says. Today, when you hear his voice, hear his voice. Today, when you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts as Israel did when they rebelled. Okay, so we've heard the voice back here before, doing what Jesus says, and now he says here, don't harden your heart. Now, what's that all about? Let's look in Psalm, and this is interesting, that this is, we're going to actually read the passage right here from Exodus 17, where this comes from. And in Psalm 95, even David lays a hold of this instance in Exodus 17 also. Psalm 95, New English Translation says, do not be stubborn like they were at Meribah, like they were that day at Massah in the wilderness. Okay, now it's interesting. The writer of Hebrews says, he's referring to this same thing. He says, don't harden your heart. David says, don't be stubborn. Talking about the same incident there. And now we're going to see another thing when we actually read the passage in Exodus 17 that talks about another thing. So let's read it. Exodus 17:7, English Standard Version. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, and because they tested the Lord by saying, is the Lord among us or not? Okay, so this is the incident right here from Exodus 17 that what I believe Paul, the writer of Hebrews, in my opinion, he's the writer, he says, don't harden your heart. And then David talks about the same incident that took place there. He says, don't be stubborn. Remember today, like it says in Hebrews, when you hear his voice, don't harden your heart, as Israel when they rebelled. Now, I don't know, a hard heart. What is a hard heart? He warns us against it. If you had to describe what is a hard heart, what would you say it is? I don't know, that's a hard one. Okay, give sure.
I think it's refusing to believe what God tells you, disobeying, and being stubborn about it, refusing to give up their self.
Yeah.
We do it in the New Testament. We do it by, like you said, daily. We have to fight the old man and get rid of him. Just being stubborn.
No, I think that's right. It's something, there's stubbornness involved with it. There's things where, in the Old Testament, they called it stiff-necked, is what they called it, stiff-necked. And, what you got there, Bob?
Well, it's questioning God and his authority, thinking we know more than he does. That's what I get out of a hardened heart.
And so what we do, okay, so everybody's looking here kind of gloom-faced, and it's like, okay, where's the encouragement in this? Okay, here's the encouragement, that if we come to the Lord and be honest about where we're at, he will change us. He will change us. And, I think the important thing is to recognize these things, is to recognize them. What is it that's here, that causes me to not be as close to the Lord as what I should be? How come, Lord, you say this and I end up doing it the other way? I want you to be honest with me. Have you ever done something different than what the Lord said to do? Raise your hand. I want you to be honest with me. Have you ever done something different? Okay, yeah. So we've all experienced some of this, where we heard something and didn't do it. And so, and thank God for his forgiveness and all the different things that go with it, because we can come to him if we're just honest with him. If we're honest with him and say, Lord, this is what I'm dealing with. Help me to get past this. That's good. Go.
To bring this to today, it is really difficult to ignore what we see. What we see, what's put, just splattered right in our faces. All kinds of things. It's new things all the time. Washington DC as a 51st state, the southern border abortion, we could just go on at the Supreme Court. And if you listen to this, why wouldn't you have a hard heart? I have to turn myself back to clinging every day because I hear all these things. I wish I didn't sometimes. But we have to know the times that we live in. So we know these things, but we have to turn our hearts to clinging. At least I do. And it sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes I have to just really talk to myself. Or maybe it's God talking through my voice. So, yeah. But it's sometimes that would create a hard heart, believe me, if you really listen to today.
Yeah, we just can't, I get 100% what you're saying. I mean, I don't even try to listen to the news anymore. It's just,
Yeah.
I mean, things are just so stupid what's going on. I mean, I like what, you guys ever heard that Senator John Kennedy out of Louisiana? Well, this is what he said. This country was created by a bunch of geniuses. It's run by a bunch of idiots. Created by a bunch of geniuses and now run by a bunch of idiots, and that's about right. Yeah. So we just gotta filter that stuff out and see what God is saying and do that. And so I try to listen to guys, that do that, and just like driving here this morning, I was listening to David Jeremiah. Where's Dale? Dale was here, he said he listened to it too. Dale always listened to him at 7 to 7:30. But David Jeremiah, he's got good, that's what he's talking about, he says, we got to see, that this world ain't our home, and when the new one comes, and it's going to be glorious and great, and none of this junk is going to be there. None of this junk. And so, hey, we're going to focus on that and believe in what God says, and believe that he can do miraculous things amongst people here too, because people's lives can be changed, but they got to kind of get past themselves sometimes too. Let's look at a couple other things here. James chapter 1, verse 22. But prove yourselves doers of the word and not just hearers who deceive themselves. Or in the New English translation says this, be sure you live out the message and do not merely listen to it and so deceive yourselves. And it's like, okay. Is there deception that goes on? I think there is deception that goes on. I think there's things that can deceive us and get us off track. I think there's things that take and look good, but maybe they're not as good as they look. And, God would say to do something in his word, and the devil whispers in your ear, well, this could be better. This could be better. It's almost kind of like in the garden, when God told him what to do, and the devil comes along and he says, well, are you sure that's really okay? And then what happened there? Because it says they were deceived, for sure deceived. But it's like he says, if we don't pay attention and do this, we deceive ourselves. And it's like, these guys say hard things, they say hard things. So it's like, okay, Lord, help me to stay out of deception. Help me to stay out of it. Help me, Lord. That should be a cry of ours too, Lord. Help me, Lord, to stay out of it. And that's it. If there's one thing that gets me in the times that we're living in, if there's one thing that gets me, Jesus, he's sitting there in Matthew 24, and his disciples come up to him, and they show him the beauty of all the temple and all this stuff that's there. And Jesus says this. He says, behold, I tell you this. Not one stone will be left on this building till they all be torn down and thrown down. In fact, you can go out on the internet if you want to. Some of those stones that were torn down in 70 AD and leveled by the Romans, they've left in a pile at the one area of the Temple Mount. They're there in a pile. They have not been moved in 2,000 years. That same pile of stones is still there from when the temple was destroyed. And it's just interesting. I mean, it's just interesting. I've seen a picture, several different angles on it, But he says, they're there. And so then the disciples ask him, and he says, when will these things happen? What shall be the sign of your coming? And what shall be the sign of the end of the age? The disciples asked him 3 questions. And the first words out of Jesus' mouth were what? Let no man deceive you. Do not be deceived. They asked him 3 questions. And what's Jesus' first answer? Don't be deceived. So it's like, so there's something about this deception that goes on there. Let's keep going so we can finish this up. Romans 6:12. Therefore do not let sin reign in your mortal body, that you should obey its lusts. Do you not, and then it goes on 16 first, do you not know that to whom you present yourselves slaves to obey, you are that one slaves whom you obey, whether sin lead to death or obedience lead to righteousness. And again, it talks about, again here, obeying something. What are you going to obey? What are we going to obey? And so it challenges us with these desires that we have in us to go after them. And sometimes we end up obeying those desires, and that's not what he wants. Now, the thing that's interesting is he wrote this to believers. This is not to the ungodly sinner out there laying in the gutter, the drunk laying in the gutter. He wrote this to believers. So not supposed to obey the lusts of our flesh. So all that's in life, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life, all this is not from God, it's from the world. So we got to hear the world's trying to creep in and to keep us from obeying. And so be aware of that. Be aware of that. Let's go to this last one here, and then we're going to close with a word of prayer, because we're going to end this on a good note here. But I just can't help getting over this one either. Galatians 3:1. Again, Paul is writing to believers, to people that are Christians here. And he says this, O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you that you should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed among you as crucified? Who has bewitched you to keep you from obeying the truth? And so, what's this about? Again, it comes back to obedience, being doers, doing what's said. And something got in the road with the people at the church of Galatia. And what was it? He said they were rich. Now, it's interesting. Christian Standard Bible puts it like this. You foolish Galatians, who has cast a spell on you, before whose eyes Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed as crucified? And what he says there on this, if you go look what this means in the original Greek, the cast a spell, the definition is right there. To fascinate by false representations. Now, it's interesting. To fascinate. A person can become fascinated by a false representation. And so it's like, okay, what's that about?
It's the news.
Go.
It's the news.
Yeah.
False representation.
Yeah. And there's a lot of different things I think involved with the false representation, but it's just something to be aware of, Because what can it do? It says here, it can cast a spell on you. It can take and I guess when I think about cast a spell on us too, it causes us to be insensitive. It causes us to be, ones that are just not serious about doing stuff. I mean, I'm talking to myself, guys. I'm talking to myself. When you read these things over and it just beats up on you and stuff like this, I mean, it's okay to be beat up on a little bit. It is. It really is. I mean, it lets you know where you're at. If it's convicting you in your heart, you say, God, that's me, that's okay. Conviction's okay. It's condemnation is what's bad. Conviction says, I got a problem, and Jesus can help me out of it. Condemnation says, you got a problem, and there's no help for you, none whatsoever. And that's the devil. The devil condemns, Jesus convicts, and Jesus says, I am the way to bring you up out of this. And so that's what's neat to me. I can be convicted and something like this where I'm not obeying the truth, and God says, hey, I'm glad you're seeing this. The first thing is to see it. First thing is to see it. And then if we see it, then we come before the throne of grace, and we just ask Jesus, I need your grace in this. I need your grace, Lord. I need your grace not to be bewitched. I need your grace, Lord, to come out of these things of lust. I need your grace, Lord, to not be deceived. I need your grace, Lord, to take up your cross. I need the grace, Lord, to take and abide in your word. And Lord, I need your grace to hear your voice each day and to follow along and love you even greater. And so, guys, I just laid this out here. When I look at obeying God, yes, we looked at those things last week in the Old Testament. The Old Testament is the foundation for everything, believe me, guys. The foundation for everything. And when we grasp that, he's saying the same thing in the New Testament that he said in the Old Testament. I just find that's just awesome. And now that we have Jesus, now that we have the Holy Spirit, now that he is abiding in us, we've got it way better than they had in the Old Testament, way better. And so we can take and just trust God to help us through all these areas. Okay? Make sense?
Amen.
Let's pray. Father, I thank you, Lord, that we can take and look at these things. I thank you, Lord, that we can take and just take and say, Lord, does any of this apply to me? Scripture says, examine yourself. Now, that's another hard one. He says, examine yourself, even to see if you're in the faith. And so, Lord, I just don't want to just go along merrily and not deal with things, Lord. When something comes up, I want to be able to deal with it because I want to obey what you say to do. So, Lord, help each of us, Lord, as we take and are challenged with these things, and that we can come to you, and, Lord, knowing that we can find grace to help at every time of need. Jesus, I thank you for grace. I thank you for your presence. I thank you for the Spirit of God living in us. I thank you that you're in us and we're in you. And, Lord, that we can just take and just draw close to you each day. Thank you, Lord. Amen. Okay, you're ready for the next one.